Wheel of Genre, the show for people most likely to write Yelp reviews for their drug-fueled hallucinations. Right now, we are reading every short story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Hagiwara Sakutaro's The Town of Cats. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in how to situate this with the rest of the weird fiction anthology. Is it weird? Is it that weird? I don't know. We'll talk about it.
How weird is it, Zach? I'm Bob. I'm interested in the restriction of aesthetics as a means for producing a kind of a weird anxiety.
I'm Chris, and I am interested in how much subtlety you can have in a story and still call it a story. And I think the Japanese are super good at that. So
we are super excited to have Chris from Liminal Spaces back on the channel. Chris, we last saw you on the Hell Screen. Just a few short stories back. I hope we don't see you on the Hell Screen. Yeah.
I'm glad to be back on here. I hope you guys cannot hear. Bob, last time I watched you was on the Avram Davidson podcast, and you were talking about a typhoon coming through, and that is now happening to me. So I hope you guys cannot hear that because it is raining and thundering a lot out here. So if you guys hear it, let me know. No, one of these times I'm going to come on, I swear, to this channel and not talk about a Japanese author, but not yet. I like talking about the Japanese authors with you guys.
This one is really good, too. So last time, Hell Screen was very dark. We have an obsessive artist. This time we have a guy who's no longer interested in travel, and now he ends up in a very weird kind of place. I think it quite fits the weird when we're going into like a neighborhood that no longer makes sense because of your experience of it.
I think, Bob, you summed it up. This guy got tired of traveling and decided that he wanted to travel through his mind and with drugs. And then we get this very interesting story that I'm sure we're going to have to talk about what is substance driven and what is supernatural and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is a story where very little happens, but so much occurs, I guess, is the only way that I could really put it.
That's a really good way to put it. And I think that thinking about who this author is might help put that into context, because this is first and foremost a poet. This is a Japanese author who's writing at the start of the 20th century, being influenced by Western writers. I mean, actually, the references in this story are, from what I could tell, more so to Western writers than to anything else. But his fame came from his poetry that he wrote, specifically his first self-published poetry book. And this is the only short story he ever wrote. But I think there's a lot of anxiety around calling it a short story, right? Like, he himself writes in it that, you know, he's kind of just writing, he's describing. It doesn't feel like it has a lot of the hallmarks that we would normally put onto a short story. And I think that formally puts a lot of tension here in what we're reading.
Yeah, and Hagiwara is like Akutagawa when we talked last time, and a lot of Japanese writers in the Taisho area, the early 1900s, right after the Meiji Restoration, are really interested in the new Western ideas, but there's this strange guilt. Like they they feel like they're somehow cheating on Japanese culture to be so, and you see it. We talked about this last time with Mishima and all these writers that really, when they're young, focus on the Western ideas and then move slowly to the Japanese ideas. So this guy's first, what was his first? Did you write down what his first?
Howling at the Moon.
Howling at the Moon.
It was really interested in existentialism, Nietzsche, and all these, because he tried to get a degree in philosophy for a while. So he was taking all this Western philosophy that was very new and very cool to the Japanese at that time, and included it in his first book of poetry. His second book of poetry, we start to see ideas of Buddha, and these more Japanese ideals start to creep in. And I feel like this story again, and we've talked about this twice now, is a perfect example of this juxtaposition between Western ideals and these old kind of Japanese myths about transforming animals and that kind of stuff. Really interesting writer, revolutionized poetry in Japan, because he stepped away from the tanka and the haiku and all these traditional types of Japanese poetry, and really was one of the first Japanese poets to really embrace free verse and introduce the concept of free verse into Japan.
I was reading, because I found that book, and in the introduction, it's really interesting. It's by Graham Wilson. And he was saying that, okay, although he's kind of an iconoclast, he's breaking away from the tanka, he's breaking away from haiku, he's doing this free verse, he is still not very popular in Japan. Maybe he is in the last couple, 20 years. But for a long time, he wasn't popular. And Graham's saying that it's because of his darkness. He says that for all his brilliance, he always seems to switch on darkness, to radiate black luminance. In the beaconry of modern Japanese literature, he is an occulting rather than a flashing light, but remains nevertheless a lighthouse of supreme importance. It's interesting to think about his character as bringing in this weird or this darkness while also innovating.
Which is interesting because everybody that was contemporary to him and afterwards dove into that darkness way more than he ever did. I don't know if this short story is a bunch of linked prose poems from him. I couldn't find a lot of information specifically on this story. Were you guys able to find any information specifically on this one?
Well, New York Review of Books published a selection of his poetry and this under the title Cat Town. So I actually pulled up some of the poems from that, and they are, what I would describe as like modernist, poetry, very free verse,
almost prose poems.
Just imagine in your mind, like 7 or 8 words, 4 words, 7 or 8 words, 2 words. You know what I mean? Like that kind of line break style. As far as I can tell, and from my research on it, this is the only prose poem that he wrote.
So I couldn't find any other prose at all.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. So it doesn't seem like this is stitched together from anything else. It seems like this is
one piece.
Very much. It's one piece. Okay. Now, I would say it does feel stitched together in the sense of its influences, especially in the sense that we talked about how for Hellscreen, the previous story we read, it felt like he was putting in Japanese content into a Western form. And you could almost say the same thing about this, but I feel like the Western form has changed in that period of time between those last two authors. Now, to me, this feels much more like a very, very modern essay. Not like a student essay, with like a thesis and 3 bullet points, but like the kind of experimental essays that you get from people like Maggie Nelson, for example, or
like a return to Montaigne almost too.
Like a return to Montaigne kind of a thing where it's like for the French word essay, the meaning of that word is to try, to attempt. So
to start out.
You're not trying to say everything there is to say on a subject. You're just giving an attempt at describing, your lived experience in relationship to this larger, grander topic. And I feel like that's exactly what he's nailing here. This is like post-Montaigne Japanese lit.
This is interesting, and I guess this is the place to do it. And I hope I'm not going to bore everybody by jumping into this right now. But structure.
Let's dive in.
The structure of this is something that I really wanted to talk about because, of course, in the West, which is interesting because Russia with Chekhov and Tolstoy and all these guys create what is kind of the modern short story. And we get Freytag's triangle, which I'm sure you're both familiar with, the inverted check mark with the rising action and, building in the climax and the denouement.
I might not be familiar with this. Can you tell me more?
Yeah. So the basic structure that is taught and has been for years through most creative writing programs is that you have the ground situation, and it starts rising action. That's where you have plot points that start moving the story along. And then you get a climax, and then, yep, exactly. And then you get some falling action and then a denouement. which is funny because this came under huge critique in the 70s as being an exact replica of a male orgasm. And so there was a lot of lit that started trying to fight against this. And you started getting these versions of this where each would have a falling action right after a tiny climax and get bigger and bigger and bigger, which eventually became soap operas, which is how all TV is now. But anyway, there are other forms. That form took over everything for the West. It took over everything for the West. And we still think in that form. But there are other forms, like a lot of Native American stuff is a circular. It comes back on itself. Japan has a really unique form that I don't really see often anywhere else. And the first time I came across this was Soseki Natsume's moan, which just means gate. You guys would know the kanji if I showed you the kanji. The story opens after this man has had an argument with his wife that he has to go and ask his landlord if they can be late on the rent. And the story ends right before he decides to walk up and ask for the rent to be late. So it is literally this guy walking around town, killing time because he doesn't want to do this thing. So if you draw out the plot structure, it's just a flat line.
It's just a flat.
It is, which is really interesting to me. And it's where anime people, this guy blew up for anime, and it became slice of life is what they call it now. Slice of life, where it's just like, here's these high school kids' daily life, and you just kind of watch them prepare for the cultural festival or whatever, right? For like 24 episodes. My kid loves slice of life.
Maybe this is the ideal that Seinfeld is also going for, even though I can't.
Right. Seinfeld slice of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and now Japanese literature, there's this kind of huge like coffee shop books, bookstore books, right? Where this person works at a bookstore and it's just like these customers walk in and it's just the daily life. And there's tiny moments, but there is overall, when you look at the plot, there's no Freytag's triangle. There's no huge climax. The character doesn't change from the beginning to the end. There's none of that. And I feel like this story, to me, was a really good example of this Japanese flatline plot. And of course, this is early and a lot of this could be argued. You could argue this against this because there are emotional climaxes in the story, but I don't know if the guy's changed by the end of this. Like if you follow like Western tradition, like this guy is probably exactly the same dude once he finds his way back to wherever he was staying. So yeah, I love the subtlety of Japanese writing. And I think that's the power that Japan can bring to the weird. There is no cosmic horror in this. There is no crazy back tattoos. I just watched your guys' last video. There is none of that in here. Like I was like, oh my God, it's going to get crazy. And it's like a split second. And if you're tired when you're reading it, you'll miss it. You got to go back and read it again because what happens is so small.
When you talk about change, I feel like there's two ways we could look at this. And one is the actual like plot climax that happens here, which is so small. Like if we have if we have that graph you showed, it's really just a blip, which is he's in this space, this weird altered space, and then a rat jumps out. And then a bunch of cats come out and then he kind of like wakes up from it. And, in the hands of a different writer, this could be a huge revelatory moment of great significance or of great import of things.
Yeah. If Raymond Carver wrote this, there'd be a huge epiphany at the end.
Yeah. It doesn't happen here though.
No,
it's very subtle, but there is a change that does happen, but it's more like he's describing and documenting the change. He's telling the history of himself from being a person who liked to travel to being a person who now views travel as nothing more than identical objects moving in identical spaces. Quote. So, wherever you are now, there's going to be a baker who works at a baker shop. And wherever you go, there's also going to be a baker at a baker shop. There's going to be the same kind of people, the same kind of thing. It's just life as a series of infinitely recurring patterns. So there's no point to travel. And then he changes his mind, literally and figuratively, to saying, well, actually, these kind of drug-induced reveries are actually the travel that I now do. And it's not a spatial travel, it's a mental travel. And he's talking about, I think he was talking about heroin and cocaine, or maybe opium and cocaine as being
it's cocaine and or not opium, it's cocaine and we got to back up a little bit. This guy decides he hates travel and decides he wants to travel in his brain, which I'm here for 100%. That's incredible. He wants to travel in his brain through the use of drugs, and the drugs he chooses is morphine and cocaine, which are the last drugs that I would choose to travel into my brain. There's not a lot of hallucinatory qualities, although I guess it depends on how much morphine you take. But I love that he's like, I thought about opium, but like opium's super hard to get here. So I'm not gonna do opium. But he creates this concept of travel in his brain. And he introduces, which I thought was like really a wild choice to start this and say, I'm going to tell you a weird supernatural story that happened to me. And I also really like drugs. Like that's going to work against you in the telling, but he was 100% for it. And I don't know if this is what you were getting to, Zach, that we can map this a different way. So we start with real travel, and then we start with drug travel, and then we get into what I think you were just talking about, which is how you look at a place where you are. And speaking of liminal, this gets super liminal because all he talks about is flipping directions, right? And if you look at something that you usually come at from the north, if you flip it and look at it from the south, it's a whole new city. It's a whole new beautiful place that you've traveled to, even though it's 2 blocks from your house.
I found that to be one of the more relatable parts of this story. So, like, for example, taking just 2 days ago, taking a taxi back to my house, a very straightforward shot. I remember at one point looking up from my phone and being like, oh, shit, where are we?
Right.
Like, oh my God, I think we overshot, or did I put the wrong address in? And then I just waited 10 seconds and we took a left turn at the spot that we always take a left turn at. You know what I mean? Like, but there are those moments where you feel lost and the world has become derealized or estranged or something else like that. And those are the moments that this author is really promoting. They're saying that we should chase, we should get ourselves lost.
Yeah, it's crazy because I drive, of course, urban sprawl out here in the Southwest. I drive everywhere, and sometimes somebody drives me, and I will just like stare out the window like, ooh, look at that. I of course, I'm a very talkative human, so I'll keep a running thing going. And I'm like, did you know there was a building over here? Because it's like brand new. It really is. It's really, it's amazing what we miss in our busy day to day. And I think that's the core of this kind of travel he's talking to. And it's interesting because drugs go out the window. Like the first part, there's regular travel, then there's drug travel, and then I'm not even sure, because he says he goes to the doctor and it was affecting his health, right? The narrator does. And then he says, so I think he stops taking the drugs. I think he quits the drugs and discovers this new way to look at the world. And I think this was really meaningful to me because I've always tried to describe moments in my life, and I've called them poetic moments, where you're suddenly struck with the beauty of your surroundings or whatever. And obviously I wasn't very good at describing it. And this guy like killed it. Because I feel like that's what he's describing. It seems like he's describing travel, but what I think he's talking about is really truly finding these moments where you trick yourself into seeing the beauty of what's actually around your neighborhood. I don't know.
There's a literary precedent for this that I have wanted to read with Bob for a long, long time. It's a French author named Xavier de Maistre. He wrote a book called Voyage Around My Room. So the idea of this text is he's using the form of travelogues, which are really, really popular at that time. And, Bob and I, as we read works like Shakespeare's The Tempest, in the 1600s, the travelogue is already something that people are familiar with and is ripe for the spoofing. You know what I mean? So here in the late 1700s, this person is saying, well, I'm going to take the way that a travelogue is written, but I'm going to talk about like my chair over here and my desk over there. And I'm going to describe my room in the way of an explorer. And it's that idea of, it's the same idea as what's going on here, I think, which is saying, yeah, we live in a world of everydayness, but if we change the way that we view it, if we alter our minds and our perspectives, we can take new insights and see new things from the world that we're already familiar with.
Which is strangely an aspect of liminality. It's strange that when you dig into this concept of liminality, you're like, okay, I have a door that's always open here. And if I open behind the door and look at the corner in there, this is an area in my house that I just never look at, but is this place between. I really loved this story. Whether it fits in the weird, we can get into later, but I loved this story for that.
Well, I do want to compare it to another story in the weird. Bob and I, we just published an episode on Jean Ray's The Shadowy Street. But the idea being presented in John Ray's story is that there is an alleyway that only the protagonist of this manuscript can see. And he can travel in it, but no one else can see it. And when he goes down this alleyway, there's this whole other street of houses that only he can go into. So in a sense, it's like a world tucked within the world that everyone else shares, but only one person has access to that world. And I think that this story, I started off this episode by questioning how weird it actually was, but if there's one way in which I would say it very clearly plays into the weird tradition, meaning, intentionally or not, it's this idea of accessing these other places that are hidden from everyone else, but where the rules are twisted and skewed.
It's interesting to me that, so he travels to some resort and he's hanging out and in the hot springs, I'm sure. And there's these two towns near his around this mountain, and he's traveling around this area and having fun and walking. So he is traveling physically. And he hears these urban legends that around these towns, there is one town that is all cats. Was the other one dogs?
Yeah, dogs.
One was dogs. Yeah.
One town was all cats. One town was all dogs. And there's different styles to each of this town. But it's interesting to me that this idea was put into his head by urban legend before he accidentally finds his way to this cat town. The idea was put into his head. And I think that is the crux of, and we can discuss whether that idea created his own hallucination or if this town is real. And that's, I think, where this balances on, is it weird or not for me?
I think it's very weird. This reminds me of certain experiences where kind of the tension between you and the universe ratchets up and up and up. So as you hear different things, you start to form this reality that couldn't possibly exist, but you've heard urban legends now, you've heard people warn you about something, you start seeing things that are a bit off, and then you come to the conclusion that no matter what, this other universe or this terrible thing exists. At the very end, he says, somewhere in some corner of this universe, a town is inhabited solely by the spirits of cats. Sure enough, it does exist. Because the whole time he has told us, look, I know this is going to sound a little bit crazy. I think this is where it gets very weird. I know this is going to sound crazy, but think about this. When people are on a train for a long time and if they fall asleep, they thought they were going west. When they wake up, it seems they're going east. And as they're doing that, it feels like they've disappeared in some sort of time issue. Then he says that when he was little, he used to look at paintings and think that he could reach back behind the painting and that the landscape would still exist.
They could turn it around.
You could turn it around and see the other side.
Yeah, that there was another world on the other side of that painting. I love that concept.
And it's great because the first title in the weird collection is The Other Side by Alfred Cuban, where the other side starts coming in. And I feel like that's happening here.
You also just described The Willows by Algernon Blackwood perfectly. Yeah. When you said this other universe, you hear all these people warning you, don't go. And then you convince yourself that this other universe is there. Absolutely.
And if you think about it too much too, that's the warning in Blackwood. It's like, if you're trying to picture this too much, it's going to happen to you. If you ignore it, maybe it'll be fine.
Thoughts are things.
Thoughts are things. And I think when he starts getting to describing the town that he ends up in, because he says, okay, I did drugs and I started seeing these crazy things. Then I stopped. Then I would be in my head too much while I'm walking. I would find I was in this town I had never seen before. I have no idea where I was. Finally, he gets into this place where he says the aesthetics are so precise that if anything goes slightly wrong, the whole place will disintegrate. It will just cease to exist. So when he enters this town, right, and it's like, it's humans, it's normal. But he says, let's see, where is this? I realized right away that the atmosphere of the town was an artificial creation whose existence relied on the subtle attentions of its inhabitants. And then he says, for instance, so it could all collapse. And he says, for instance, if uttering a word slightly too high in pitch was forbidden, for it would shatter the harmony of the entire town. So as he enters this town, he starts to feel this anxiety welling up in him to the point where the town itself starts to transform. He sees that it gets tighter. It feels like it's getting tighter, like he kind of is losing room. When he looks up at the buildings, he says that they almost turn into spires, reaching higher and higher and higher up. The roofs seem to distort. And then when that rat runs through, it just suddenly cats. And I feel like this experience can happen to anybody. When I was working at Powell's a long time ago, I was on the way to work, and then the sewers were on fire. So from manholes, the sewers were on fire. So the manholes.
What city were you in?
In Portland. So the manholes had blown off, and it was just these huge plumes of smoke. I'm saying like 50, 60 feet of smoke just shooting up from the street. So of course you think, that's odd. And then I go to work, and then stuff just gets weirder. The power goes out, and so they're deciding, okay, in the whole store, and this is, the biggest bookstore in the world, it's just dark. I'm there. I'm starting to freak out. Not freak out a little bit, but like, this is strange. Somebody comes up really offended. They slam a Bible at the cash register and they say, I can't believe this. Why can't you sell this to me? I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. And then he just leaves. Then someone who had surgically implanted devil horns into his head, and I swear that this is true, showed up and said, have a nice day, sir. And then left. And then they said, okay, everybody can evacuate. And it's your choice if you want to continue to work or not. And I flipped out and was like, oh my God, I need to save the cats. I ran back home. I put the cats in their kennels. I carried them in my arms, and we got out of that sewer, where the sewers were on fire, that part of the neighborhood. So I think when you have this kind of experience, it just happens to where you're like, okay, whatever crazy thing I'm thinking is now true. And this happens to him. But the anxiety, I think, really, and where it becomes really weird is he says, you might not believe this. You might say this is because I was taking too much cocaine, I was taking too much, whatever he was taking. But imagine Zhuangzi, who had the dream of where he was a butterfly, and then he wakes up and he says, wait, was I really a human dreaming that I was a butterfly, or am I still a butterfly now dreaming that I'm human? And so I think his anxiety now comes from this town that was so brittle, or that was so devoted to its aesthetic, like, shield, or its aesthetic kind of wholeness, that if something snapped, the whole truth goes away and everything is a cat city. So if it is a cat city, his whole life has not really happened. It's kind of gone. So I think it's a weird threat in that way, where it's not like beings reaching in. It's like everything I thought was true is no longer true, and that threatens my whole existence.
Yeah, looking behind the veil. Because it seems like the people are cats. He hints that the people are gone and all these cats are like on this rat, and they're like falling out of the windows, clown car style, right? All these cats, and then everything just kind of quiets back down. I've never heard the sentence, the sewers were on fire, and that is...
It was true.
You got to start a story with that. The sewers were on fire. What an interesting image to start. Because my first thought is, how you start the sewers, and then I'm like, wait a minute, there is so much shit that can burn in a sewer.
Truly.
I love that. I think that's exactly what he's getting at. He's trying to describe something that I think is something that all of us have felt at times. And you know, I mean, it's weird. Like if you go into a party and you're like, hey, does anybody have any ghost stories? Like the stories that come out are incredible. The things that people will tell you. And if you listen to them, you can like look at it two different ways at the same time. You can think, okay, this is what really happened. And this is what they think happened. And both of those narratives can run side by side. And I think that is an incredible thing that we can do with our brains, that we can have these moments where we feel like the veil is thin and we're seeing the truth of what is behind, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I think he really nailed it with this. And I think that is the arc of the story, is this idea of traveling to the point where you go somewhere and see behind the veil, in his case, a town of cats, which sounds awesome. I loved all these cats coming out of the window. I thought it was great.
Me too. I think it'd be adorable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to pull on that thread about it being constructed or feeling constructed, because I feel like it's not insignificant that he's a poet. You know what I mean? And a poem is held together by using the most precise words to bring something verbal into actuality. And there's that craft book, that poetry craft book, Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, which, you know, I can't speak on any detail because I read it at least 10 years ago. But one of the things I remember in it is her technique that she gives aspiring poets is to basically sit on a park bench, look at people, look at birds, look at things, and just make up a story about them. Where's this man going? What's he up to? You know, you don't know anything, but, you know, you create the story in your brain and the world becomes enchanted with all of the you know, the accumulation of stories and kind of fantasies that you're projecting out onto the world. And that's what you're trying to capture in your poem. Yeah. And I was thinking about that, you know, because, you know, he's a poet and he's describing this place around him. And this idea of the world being so brittle, you know, like, it's the fantasy can pop at any second. I don't know. I feel like there's something very literary about his fantasy, but he just gives us so little. It's so tantalizingly like it's just a hint. He doesn't spell it out in the way that I want him to.
Yeah. Well, and I think that connects to our love of Freytag's Triangle. I just read Hiroko Oyamada's The Hole. And this was the most subtle horror novel I've read in a really long time. And every plot point that happened, I was like, oh, here we go. Like this is going to go off the rails. And it never did. And halfway through the book, I was like, man, if I was of the Japanese ideology, if I was born and raised in Japan, would I be sitting here going, oh, here we go, this is when it's going to get crazy? I think that we have this built into our ideology that we expect things to go big. And that is, I think, completely the opposite of what a lot of these Japanese writers try to do. They try to create the most subtle horror that they can. And I think that this story probably scared people when they first read it in Japan. I'm sure it did, but it's not very scary to us. To me, I'm just like, wow, you've beautifully captured this philosophical idea and this essence. But I think he was also trying to build tension and horror. I think he was. I really do. And it's just, we are so desensitized to the big that I think when presented with the small, it always confuses us. I don't know.
I would really agree, Chris. When I was reading this, it makes me think, I know he's trying to, through free verse, the way people phrase it often is he helped Japan escape the tanka and the haiku. But I feel like it still feels like a haiku where, you have just one thing and you're just trying to focus on one moment that for you somehow was numinous or just important, where you saw like one leaf fall onto the icy lake and you're like, okay, that's the moment that I'm going to express. And while this is very built out, it's a full story, it feels like when we just have that one moment of all of these cats, it feels like a haiku where, okay, that's my defining moment, because if this is true, this changes everything. But in the introduction, we were talking about howling at the moon or barking at the moon. Sometimes it's translated. The person who wrote the introduction is Kitahara Hakushu, and he described Hagiwara as a couple different things, but he often describes him as a razor. So one quote, he says that his early poems are a razor soaked in gloomy scent. Later, he becomes, nice, and he says, a flash of a razor in a bowl of cool mercury. So he has these just knife edge kind of stories where it feels, although it's we build tension, it's a horror story, we have a whole experience of, okay, this is my way of travel. I think the one moment where it all gleams together like a razor cutting through the divide of, the real and the not real, or one universe and the other, he cuts through it, and that's what we experience. I think it's strange later, too. They said that lots of the people who are writing these introductions, like Graham Wilson, and then the Hakushu, is saying that he kind of had his alcoholism really affected him, and it made him it just took his life apart. So eventually they go from all of these razor comparisons to being life as, for you, mere sake spilt along the bar, which of course has that gleam like a razor does. You can reflect something in sake, but now it's just can't cut through anything. So I think it was interesting to have him go through haiku, escape haiku, but then still try to get that ineffable experience into one story.
That is really interesting. I taught a poetry class, and I did a section like on T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that poem at all. Really, the kind of sadness of getting old. We spent weeks talking about the images and everything. And then we got to the haiku unit, and we did Basho's famous frog jumps into the water sound of the water. I can't remember the exact haiku. I should. It's super small. But we came to this point where I was like, okay, here's the poem. Cold Mountain Lake, or I can't remember it at all, but a frog jumps in the water. No, a frog jumps, sound of the water. It's like one of the most famous Japanese haikus of all time. And my class was like, okay. And then I was like, okay, so what do we do with this? And they were like, what do you do with that? Like, it's an image, right? I said, like what the Japanese want you to do with that is sit down and, reflect on it and think about it and put yourself in that image and then get that feeling from it and move on, right? You can't take apart haiku like you can the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And it's funny because when haiku moves to the Beat generation, they're the ones that really brought it over to America. They added all this depth to haiku, like the I think Ginsberg wrote one about, or maybe Kerouac, about driving. Yeah, and you're seeing the beautiful scenery out your window through the smeared guts of a fly on your windscreen, right? Like that is some American shit added to a Japanese haiku right there, because it's a small image. They were obsessed with image, whereas we were more, and image is still very important. There's lots of great images in Prufrock, but we were using image to push philosophical ideas. And I think that's what this poet, I forgot his name, Hagiwara, took from all of his philosophy classes and everything, is he took this Japanese idea of image, the image of all the cats in this town attacking a rat, which, I mean, who knows? He might have seen this somewhere, right? And instead of just making the haiku and giving that image, he broke free from the haiku and allowed all this philosophy to drain in. And I think that is the most Western part of all of this, is that he is not just leaving us with the image. It is super hard to discuss haiku for a 50-minute period in a class. It really is. It's really difficult when you get the real haiku core basho stuff. And I know that there's going to be viewers that are going to be like, I could talk about for an hour and a half, and I get it. It's beautiful. But it's hard to discuss. Like what else more can you say about the frog jumping in the pond and making a splash? It's not meant for discussion. It's meant to give you the place in your head. I don't know. That was a tangent. I didn't even expect to say all that.
I like that tangent.
Yeah.
I want to return to one thing you said earlier, Chris, when you're talking about this kind of anxiety that a lot of the Japanese writers were having. Okay, I'm using these Western influences, and we know that Hagiwara was interested. You said Nietzsche already. He also was interested in Schopenhauer. I think one of his biggest influences, though, was Beethoven, because he was also a musician.
Ukulele,
mandolin,
right?
Mandolin.
No, mandolin. Yeah, you're right.
But I wonder, when we've talked about Mishima before, there's that famous quote from Mishima of saying, okay, why do we still need the emperor? Because he had his militia, but he said, look, if you have 52 cards, I have the one card outside that can control them all. I have the Joker, I have the emperor. And he wanted to keep Japan as Japan, and he didn't want it to change. He wanted to keep it conservative. I wonder if there's that anxiety here too, because in this new town that he goes to, he's like, suddenly there's a bunch of Western houses. Oh, there's even a barbershop pole. Why is there a barbershop pole? I think it's strange because then it's,
sorry, it's interesting to me that Mishima is saying this after the Meiji era, where
a long time out,
where Japan changed in 30 years entirely, right? I mean, it's so weird after all that to be like, well, I don't want it to change. And I think probably what he's really saying is, I don't want it to change anymore. Haven't we done enough modernizing? Can't we keep something? I mean, it would be really weird to have been medieval to 1860 and then just suddenly modernize in 30 years. And when we read Spring Snow, I don't know if you guys want to jump in on that. It's going to be a riot.
For sure.
By Yukio Mishima. We're starting at the Taisho era right after that. And all these people thinking about that remembered some feudal Japan and some Meiji. It had to be wild. It had to be wild because everything, I mean, and my grandpa, well, my great grandpa, but I grew up with him as kind of my grandpa. But anyway, he was born in 1879. So I knew him at the very end of my life. But he always would say, and he hit 100. He always would say, I started with carts and buggies. And, now people are landing on the moon. So there is, we get that a little bit here, I think, in our culture, but nothing like 30 years. We're going to restructure everything. Yeah. I can't even imagine. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the Western houses. It is interesting that he said that, right? Cause as I marked it, I was like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah. What's this?
This is because the idea of animals transforming into humans is very old Japan. So yeah, we have this old Japan idea, especially they were talking about the festivals. Do you guys watch Miyazaki movies?
Yeah, I think I feel like he got some inspiration from the story.
So the cat returns.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that one where they're all these cats are having this huge parade and there's the tuxedo cats are the Secret Service. And they're throwing other cats out that are problematic. And I mean, that is such an old Japan idea. And then to just say, look, these houses are Western. That's weird. Was really that was an image that I think was very purposely dropped in there to create this juxtaposition that we see over and over and over again in this Taisho era of the Western versus the original Japanese culture.
One thing I wanted to ask you guys was if either of you have read Murakami's 1Q84, because supposedly, I haven't read that one, but this story is an influence on a certain chapter in that book. And I saw a lot of discussion while researching for this book of Murakami fans and Murakami forums being like, has anyone ever read The Town of Cats? It's supposed to be a real story, but I can't find any information anywhere. And then I saw like another like person being like, yeah, it's a really obscure Japanese short story. Only Murakami and his close circle of friends have heard of it. And I was just like, whoa, this is a really interesting. Like as a person researching, it's interesting to come in through the opposite way of, I guess, how most people find this story.
So I love Murakami. IQ84 was kind of the end for me. A lot of people always recommend people to start there, and I really disagree with that. I hope I don't get you a bunch of hate comments. But IQ84 is absolutely about looking at your town or world from different perspectives. So the first chapter, this woman is in a taxi, and they're on the freeway, like where you don't get out of a car, but it's all backed up. So she's like, you know what? I can walk quicker. There's a stairway over there. And she pops out of the car and she walks down this stairway. And then she starts noticing subtle differences in the world. The biggest one being there are two moons in the sky. It's been a while since I've read this. But literally it opens with her doing a thing that would force her to look at her town from a different perspective, just like in this book. So I didn't know that, but now that you mention it, that makes perfect sense to me. That makes perfect sense to me. But I wouldn't start with IQ84 with Murakami. I mean, it's like starting with War and Peace. That's not where you begin. It's a crazy concept that and everybody's like, it's a science fiction book, and I'm like, no, Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World is a science fiction book. But yeah, I see that. That's really interesting, and now I'm looking at IQ84, and it makes perfect sense. Interesting. Yeah. I would say the first chapter is the one he based it off of.
Put some tiger in your tank.
We'll have to read it. I remember when it came out, I had read everything up to that point, and then it came out and I saw the size of it, and I was like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually. And then I just never read Murakami again. So it's something I should probably get back to.
I don't know what happened. For me, it's so I remember my buddy read it recently, and he said I'm a little bit crazy, but I was at the bookstore 10 minutes before it opened to buy this book, which was idiotic because nobody cares about Murakami that much. So they were like, who? And they had to go in the back and pull it out. And they're like, yeah, I guess this does get put on the shelves today. But I got my copy and I brought it home and I just devoured it. But it was the first time in Murakami where I found myself getting really, really bored.
Yeah.
Which I did not expect. There's two narrators, a man and a woman, and their paths are going to cross. And that's a large, and I haven't read this in a while, so if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But that's a huge crux of what we're waiting for, is for these two paths to cross. And I remember hours of this person sitting in a park, staring at the moons, sitting on the slide, and this person almost meeting the person, but he walks past after she's already gone. Yeah, I just, I mean, he was the writer that gave me the idea that books can be liminal. I mean, that's what I run my whole channel off. I got it from Murakami, but yeah, and IQ84 is super liminal, and so is Killing Kamadatori, but I couldn't finish it.
Well, Chris, tell us about your channel. For people who are watching this right now who aren't already subscribed to your awesome channel, what is it that you feel like people need to know about what you have coming up and what you do over there?
I like to chase down the weirdest. I chose the name Liminal because I like this concept, the concept of liminality in books, the rabbit hole, all that kind of stuff. So I like to chase down texts that are that rub against the grain of what is normal. This month I have scheduled way too many appearances on other channels. I didn't mean to. So I've got a lot of backup videos that I'm going to put out. I just read Elizabeth Engstrom's Black Ambrosia and made a video about that. I'm going to put that up. And then Virgil from Literally Books and I just did a huge deep dive into the last book in Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, which is called The Citadel of the Autarch. So that's going to be like a 2.5 hour video that's going to be coming up soon. Other than that, you can find me all over on other people's channels. I'm going to be on Ebes with Jacob Pope Mortem, and we're reading Fritz Leiber's The Spectre is Haunting Texas, which is a crazy satire. Yeah, so the title is based on another book. What is it? Do you guys know this?
It's from Karl Marx.
Yeah, a
specter is haunting the world. The specter of communism.
Yeah. So I read Marx way back. I don't remember much about. I remember the religion is the opiate of the masses and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting because this is a story about Texas has taken over all of like most of North America from like Mexico all the way up to the North Pole. They have enslaved anybody that's Mexican or Mexican American. It's written in a different time. So some of it can be very, very over the top. The racism is really hard to get through, but it's a very liberal text. It's trying to show you. I mean, this Fritz Leiber did not like Texas. So I'm 50 pages in. At first I was like, oh my God, this is going to suck. And then I got about 50 pages and I was like, okay, wait a minute. This is an interesting post-apocalyptic world. So we'll see how that turns out. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to be doing that and all kinds of other stuff. Oh, I'm Robin at Bookspin. We're reading City by Clifford Simak. Have you guys ever read that?
No. City.
It's really early look at how the Earth is going to be in the future. And it ends up with dogs and robots. And if you like dogs and robots, it's a good time. But the first part's really hard to get through. But man, the end of it was incredible. So I'll be all over everybody's channels in the next month. And you can find some Gene Wolfe and 80s horror on my channel coming up.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like the main thing for me in watching your channel is that you have such a wide range of knowledge in terms of like science fiction, horror, weird stories. You know, you're an encyclopedia of authors and titles. And, you know, for Bob and I, oftentimes we're approaching these stories and authors for the very first time, whereas you have such like a deep background with them and a pre-existing relationship, I guess I could say. So what you bring to the conversation, it can be really, really interesting. And the context that you give things can be, it's helpful. It's so fascinating. It's really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my single mindedness. I am constantly looking for a feeling that I get when stuff is so weird that it makes me want to like stand up while I read it. I don't know if you guys ever stand up when you're reading something because it's blowing your mind so good. But I'm looking for that. And I've thrown a wide net trying to find that.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and I'll talk to you later, Bob and Chris.
Talk to you later, Chris. And oh my God. Zach, what is that behind you? What is behind you, Zach? What on earth is behind you?
What?
Chris, do you see that?
I do.
Oh my
right
God.
behind you on your shoulder there.